Good morning everyone, and welcome to the webinar on job interview tips. I run this webinar because a lot of people who come to my public speaking workshops come so because they struggle with job interviews, and it's the public speaking or the presentation side of job interviews that they struggle with. They've obviously completed the selection criteria, or they've provided sufficient information to get to the interview stage, and then they start crumbling or falling to bits. So this job interviews webinar is to give you some tips and some ideas so you can be more confident in the spoken word and the way you present yourself before a job interview panel. Most of you know me, so Peter is my name, and my passion is to help people find their voice so that they can confidently and effectively get their message across, contribute to society, put their point of view across, and of course be successful at job interviews. My email's there, my website is there if you need more information, and I do lots of free tips and information on my Facebook, so you can like me at Public Speaking Dynamics, my pages, and you'll get these tips. A whole range of tips on different public speaking issues. How to participate, there's a few new names, I think. Please ask questions as we go. At any stage, type in the dialogue box, that little question box, and say, hey Peter, what about this? Please take notes and reflect and think about how this information may help you. And one of the ways you can do this is cast your mind back to a past interview, and how did that go, and what did you do, and how did you interact with the panel? Is there anything that I say that you could have done, included, or removed to make that interview more effective? The other way is move your mind forward to an upcoming job interview and think of, what am I going to do that I wasn't thinking about as a result of this webinar? So it's about applying the information. So it's not just taking notes. Please participate and then think, how does this apply to me? So the agenda, and it's just a half-hour webinar, so it will be fairly quick. Do your preparation. Really key. Use a structured approach. Rather than just speaking and stopping speaking at interview when someone asks you a question, there is a structured approach for your job interview. Always end strongly, and part of a structured approach will ensure that you let people know what is the outcome or what is the result of every example you give. What do you do if you cannot answer a question? If the interview panel does ask you a question and you are unable to answer it, don't forget your body is also speaking. So how do you come across effectively and confidently, non-verbally, within a job interview situation? And most of you will already know this, but always get feedback, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the importance of the feedback. So let's get started. That's the agenda. Your preparation. Build a bank of questions. Let's say one of the questions in the criteria or the job description or the position data form says that you need good interpersonal skills or good conflict resolution skills. Think of all your past experience of when you've resolved conflict or when you've had to use your interpersonal skills, and just write them down. Just one word or one sentence is probably all you need to remind yourself of the time I negotiated with the Health Department of WA and the Federal Health Department to save West Australia $20 million. So that's a high-level example. You build these bank of questions, and as you go through your career and you come across those real difficult conversations, those brilliant projects that you've brought back on track that were running over time, those case studies that you've been crucial in resolving, you need to collect them so that when you go to job interview, you've got this ready bank of questions. Recency is important, so be wary of those wonderful situations you solved 10 or 15 years ago. They may not be relevant, so try and get fresh examples as you go on, as you move through your career. Anticipate tricky questions. And there's those questions, the icebreaker questions. What do you bring to this organisation? What makes you the most suitable person? And while they may not put a lot of merit on those questions, they are questions that are often asked as an icebreaker. And of course, the end of interview question, is there any questions you have of us? What question are you going to ask? And you probably don't ask what the wage is, how much money am I going to get paid. If you don't know, you probably negotiate that after you've got the job. But to say, no, I don't have any questions also doesn't look very professional or very considered around the interview. Have your negative examples prepared. You know those questions where they say, can you give me an example of where you've used your interpersonal skills to resolve conflict and you were not able to resolve conflict? And what did you learn from that, and what would you do differently if you experienced that similar conflict again? And to say, look, I always resolve conflict, my projects always come in on time, is the wrong answer. Give me an example of the most difficult project you've had. What were the confounding factors, and what was the major issue why you weren't able to finish the project on time and on budget? Don't respond, my projects always finish on time, because they're not looking to trick you. What they really want is an understanding of your ability to do project management and understand the different processes, and using a negative one is equally powerful as using a positive one. It's the learning that you show in that project. Be ready for double-barreled questions, and I briefly mentioned that, or the triple-barreled questions. Give an example of when you've used your interpersonal skills to resolve conflict. Then the next part of the question, if you had similar conflict again, would you use the same model, or would you do something differently? In hindsight, could have you brought in extra resources, or if you needed extra resources, where would you get those resources? So that's a triple-barreled question. And feel free to break them down. So you can say something. So the first part of the question, if I understand you correctly, is to give an example when I've used my interpersonal skills to resolve conflict. Answer that and then go back. So the second part was, what would I do if I had that situation again? Would I do anything differently? And then you answer the second part. And do practice out loud. So it is the spoken word. Have a friend, a colleague, a family member throw you some of the questions from your bank of questions and practice answering them out loud, and practice using some of the templates I'm going to show you. So that's the power of your preparation, really important. Structure. This is one of the mistakes, and I've sat on thousands of job interview panels over 30 years working within the health department. One of the common mistakes is people just talk and they start telling about what they've done, their example, and then they stop speaking. These are two models. They're basically identical. The one to your left, the star model, outline the situation, so paint a bit of a picture. So there was two staff members that were arguing, fighting. Other staff were coming to me saying, Peter, you need to do something about this. So the task at hand was I needed to resolve this conflict, and I needed to do it fairly quickly because it was having an effect on staff morale. The action that I took, where possible, use I statements. So I took person A aside and I spoke to them and I reminded them of the code of conducts and the code of ethics. I then took person B aside, so use I statements. I hear a lot of people say we, so I formed a team and then we did this and then we did that and then we all lived happily ever after. The interview panel wants to know, what did you do? Now, where it was a we, you can't say I. So with your bank of examples, you need to pick examples that you had the lead role. And finally, the results, or as in the SAO model, the outcome. What happened? As a result of my intervention, there's been no further interpersonal conflicts. As a result of my intervention, the project came in on time and in on budget. And in fact, that project was put forward for an organisational award because of its structural efficiency or whatever. The SAO is exactly the same. It just merges task and action into one. So the situation was the action you took and the outcome or the result. So whether you're a STAR person or a SAO biscuit, that's up to you. Use the model. The result and the outcome are crucial. A lot of people say, so person A, person B, they were fighting, people coming to me arguing, I did this, I did this, I did that. I gave them the equal opportunity training and the code of conduct, and I put all this stuff in place. And then they stopped talking. As an interview panel member, I want to know, but what happened? What happened as a result of what you did? So make sure, and that brings me to our next point, make sure you end strongly. And simply put, this means at the end of every question, you need to nail your response. It's not sitting on the fence. An interview panel, in asking you how would you deal with interpersonal conflict, do not want you to say, well, I could do this, I could do that. I'm sure one of them would work. It's putting your position forward. And if I just go back, this is behavioural-based job interviewing. More and more interview panels are talking about real situations. Real situations. So rather than doing the hypothetical, questions, they want real examples of when you have resolved conflict, a real project you've worked on, a real communication or presentation that you've done. So the hypotheticals are less effective, i.e. so they're less effective. How would you deal with two people in conflict? Well, I suppose what I do, that's not as effective as, well, let me give you an example of a recent conflict that I was involved in resolving. So this is called behavioural-based job interviewing, and it's being used more and more. So we go back to ending strongly. Nail your response. Don't sit on the fence. It's finishing every scenario with the outcome or the result. What happened in the end? So this is the last part of the STAR model, the result, or the last part of the SAO model, the action that you take. Make sure, as a result of my report, it was adopted and the department has put it up for Parliament, and they're making a change to legislation to allow such and such, or whatever the result of your most significant report. If the skill was report writing is an essential requirement for this job. Can you give me an example of a significant report that you've written? Once again, people will talk about the report, what they did, what the report found, but then they don't go on and as a result of the report. And once again, select the right bank of stories, select the right report. The report that is sitting on the shelf and nothing's happened, there's been no policy change, no organisational change, is probably not the best report to use. So think of a significant report where as a result of your report there has been change. So that's end strongly. Really important with job interviews. Don't just stop talking. Once again, feel free to type in any questions, any comments, and I can answer them as we go. What do you do if you cannot answer a question? It's really not rocket science. Don't make it up. So job interview is not the time to make up or pretend that you've done something. People that do good referee checks will actually ask the referee specifically about one of the examples. So Peter, so one of the criteria is, and let's say you're my referees, so one of the criteria is effective conflict management skills. Peter used an example in the interview of the time he resolved conflict between person A and person B, and as a result of that, there's been no further conflict. Can you comment on that example? And if the referee, my old boss, says, well, in actual fact, Peter played only a very small role in that conflict. He brought it to my attention, and then that was the end of it. So, in fact, Peter did not resolve that conflict. So don't make it up. You will get found out. It's not the time to bluff. Learn from it. So let's say you get asked a question that you don't have the answer. Make sure you write it down and you learn from it. Then go away and get that skill, get that knowledge, or get that experience if required. And be ready next time. Often gaining a promotion or moving across professions to a new profession or to a new industry or a new sector requires several goes. And it's really hard to speak the language and know what the interview panel is after, so be ready next time. And certainly when we stretch and we go for promotion, sometimes we apply for jobs that are a little bit above us. And depending on how many people apply, we may find ourselves sitting before an interview panel for quite a significant promotion. And if the question is, can you give me an example where you've managed a team of 20 or more on a major project and your current team is only 5 people, then what you do is you say, look, I have never managed a team that size, but I can give you an example where I've used 5 people to do a significant project. Now, that may not get you the job, but now you understand that you need to have a experience of managing 20 people or more. So you go back to your existing job and you need to get an acting opportunity, you need to get a project where you can take a lead role, and management allows you to bring a team of 20 people together. So it's not a bad thing if you get stretched at job interview and you cannot put forward an example or you cannot demonstrate. It's not a bad thing. It means you've probably stretched. Learn from it. The only mistake is the one that you don't learn from. Just going to pause for a moment. Just see if there's any questions. So can you use a hypothetical when you've put forward a real example? If it's a specific question and it's a behavioural-based question, for example, in this job you need good leadership skills and team management skills, and you're going to have a team of 20 people. Can you let me know, can you give me an example of when you've had to bring a team of 15 to 20 people together when they've had different points of view and varying levels of understanding? So if you hypothetically say that, then really you're not being honest. However, if the question is how would you resolve conflict, and you say, well, hypothetically, and you don't even have to say hypothetically, well, what I'd do is I would use such and such conflict model, and I would go through the 3 stages. Let's say negotiation. I'd go through the pre-negotiation phase, find out what our bottom line is, versus what their bottom line is, what I anticipate their bottom line is, work out where I can move. Then I go into the negotiation, then there's the post-negotiation, and then there's a follow-up. Hypothetically, you could use a framework. Then someone else in the interview gives you the framework and says, and let me give you an example of when I've used that framework. 6 months ago, I had to negotiate on behalf of our company. I think the hypothetical will hold less weight, less water, but by all means you can bring in a hypothetical if that's all you've got, as long as it doesn't imply that you've done something, that you've worked with 20 people. Now, feel free. I talk about the difference between a CV and a resume. Your curriculum vitae is your curriculum of life. Your resume is a subset of your CV that you put forward to stake a claim for a job. Now, in Australia, we use CV and resume almost interchangeably. But what I'm saying is you may have to grab something outside of your work life. So maybe you coach a football team, or maybe you manage a sporting club in your spare time on the weekends. So you've had to work with 20 parents to put together a trip for the West Australian junior football team to go and play against the other states in Queensland. And the project required organising accommodation, flights, schedules, agendas, and bringing 20 parents on the same page, not to mention the same number of children. So that's not your work life, but that's a valid example, because the skills to manage that sort of project or to lead that number of people would be similar to an organisation. I would save a hypothetical as a last resort. Effective nonverbal communication. You need to be genuine and authentic. You need to have credible body language and approachable body language. So credible is when you're giving your answers. Approachable is when you're first starting out and doing the meet and greet, and I'm really pleased to be here. As a general role, your voice in credible will be steady. When you're approachable, your voice will have that upward swing, that rise and fall, that music in your voice, lovely, approachable voice. But at some stage when you get into answering the difficult questions, you need to become credible. Your eye contact should be with everyone in the interview panel. One of the mistakes people make at interview is one of the three panel members asks the question and then the entire response is delivered back to that person. Please make eye contact with everyone in the interview panel. You can also match and mirror the body language of the panel. That's assuming it's appropriate. Some panel members may slouch and lay back in their seat and put their arms behind their head, and that's just alpha male sort of dominant language, so they're running the interview. I wouldn't mirror that, but leaning forward as they lean forward and just leaning back a little bit as they take on board what you've said, so you can use that. When you sit in your chair, your back should not be against the chair. Just imagine a seated violinist or a seated trumpet player. You know, the musician, when they sit in their peak performance, there's space between the back of their chair and they're sitting on the front 2/3 of the chair. That gives you good breathing, good physiology and good posture. You need to have the right level of energy and the right level of passion. You need to want to be there. So to go through the job interview really blasé and without showing the right level of energy and passion for that job, you may give the impression that you're not that interested in the job. I wouldn't come across too rah, 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 jumping up and down, you beauty type as well, because that may also affect your chances of getting the job. Bearing in mind, if you look at research, and Malcolm Gladwell is just one of them, he suggests that within the first 15 seconds, the interview panel has made up their mind around you yourself. They've already got your CV, they've already got your qualifications, they already know your level of experience. So a lot of the stuff at interview panel at the interview is not only reconfirming and probing on your ability to think, but it's also reading those other skills, those soft skills, those emotional intelligence skills, your honesty, loyalty, integrity, reliability. And that comes from your nonverbal communication. Do smile. Do pause. Please breathe. Breathe's really important. Breathing's important. Try and avoid filler words. In fact, I could do a whole 1-hour webinar just on the nonverbal communication aspects of doing a job interview. So just some quick things. Make sure you look organised. The first impressions count at job interview. With your handshake, make sure you mirror and match the handshake. Don't crush the person's hand. Don't offer them the wet fish handshake. Mirror and match the handshake that you receive from each of the interview members. That's assuming they shake your hand. This is part of the first 15 seconds. Make sure you look organised. Ladies, don't bring a handbag and a satchel and a laptop bag. Bring one. If you're going to bring a satchel with some notes, then you need to park your handbag or your laptop bag somewhere else. You may be the most organised person in the world, but if you come in with a shoulder bag and then a pile of notes, it just looks disorganised. So your first impressions count. If you're really interested in your nonverbal communication from a job interview perspective, I like this book from Alan and Barbara Peace, and they've also written other body language books, but this is in the workplace, and it just gives you a few tips that you may be unaware of from a workplace and from a job interview perspective. Guys, so gentlemen on the webinar, simple things like, have you polished your entire shoe, or have you just quickly given the toes a shine up, so as you walk out, everyone looks at the heels of your shoes and notice they're scuffed and dirty, and so your attention to detail is very small. So make sure you polish the whole shoe. The other thing with body language, and if you haven't seen this TED Talk by Amy Cuddy, I recommend you do, is make sure before you go into the job interview that you do your power poses, that you look confident, that you feel confident, you pretend to be confident. So one of the things in nonverbal communication is you can fake being you're confident. You can't make up questions, so you can't fake answers. You can't fake that you know the organisation or the job that you're applying for. You can do your research about the job that you're applying for. You can do the research about your organisation, but don't make it up. You can make up or pretend that you're confident. So to look at this TED Talk, just go to my website and you'll notice that on one of the top is the blog. Click on the blog and there'll be a little search box with and just type in Amy Cuddy. So just type in Amy Cuddy, and it'll take you to this blog which I've written, and then you can click on the TED Talk. Really powerful stuff. It's the #2 most watched TED Talk of all time, and it comes out of Harvard. It comes out of Harvard Business School. So always get feedback. Feedback is the food of champions. The road to self-insight runs through other people. So how well did you do at the job interview? What could have you done better? This is part of your learning process. Even if you get the job, I recommend that you get feedback because there's always room for improvement. And be targeted with the feedback. Don't let them brush you off and say, yeah, you did really good, but there was someone that was better for you, someone that was just more qualified. Then you need to ask the question, so specifically, what could have I done, or what if I had would have put me equal with that person? So you now have a performance improvement plan for your own job interview process. Any questions, type them in. Just wrapping up, because we've got a few minutes to go. Workshops are in Perth and in Melbourne and in Bunbury and in Kalgoorlie. They're on my website also. Those of you who like webinars, I've got webinars coming up. Once again, that's one of the tabs. So a simple checklist for public speaking. So sort of 10 things, if you tick them off before every presentation, you will enhance your chances of success. The good, the bad, the ugly of nonverbal communication. This is going to be a 1-hour webinar just on nonverbal communication. And tips to effectively use your voice as a speaker. All those things are coming up. You can find them on my website. You know how to reach me. In summing up, for job interviews, do your preparation. Preparation is probably the cornerstone. Use a structured approach rather than just speaking and then stopping speaking, and end strongly is part of that structured approach. Don't make up questions, but do challenge and stretch yourself. So if you do find yourself going for a job and a question comes that you just can't meet, that's a learning opportunity. Are you aware of what your nonverbal communication is saying about you at job interview? Once again, practice your presentation in front of a colleague, a friend, or a family member and get some feedback on your nonverbals. You can practice your nonverbal communication in front of a mirror and just see what you're doing. And always get feedback from the job interview process. As always, any further questions, please just email me, info@peterdew.com.au or peter@peterdew.com.au. I'd love to help you in any way that I can. If you're interested in a workshop in-house for your organisation or one of the workshops in Melbourne or Bunbury, Perth, just let me know. And as always, I do record this webinar. I've gone through it fairly quick, being a half-hour webinar. If you'd like a copy of the webinar, just send me an email and I'll link you to that YouTube recording. Any final questions? As it goes 9:31, and I understand if you do have to leave. Any last questions? Yeah, so the hypothetical use as a last resort would be my final comment on that. And once again, thank you for your participation, and we'll leave it at that.